This is the intro now.
Yeah. All right. Episode 21, Blackjack. That was the intro. So I guess we'll talk about what's been all over Twitter today.
Yeah.
Which is the Tom Wilson issue, which I don't really look at as a Tom Wilson issue. I look at as a George Peros issue. But go ahead.
So we are going to jump right into, I guess, the meat and potatoes of this episode here, because it's very much at the forefront of the hockey world right now. At other times, we've, I guess, in a way, kind of buried the lead and been like, okay, viewer questions first, let's do this, and then we'll get to the big stuff. Rundown for today's show, a lot on Tom Wilson. We will get into some viewer questions and kind of our look around the league. But yeah, we wanted to get straight into the Tom Wilson conversation here because, again, why bury the lead? But before that, there was something I quickly wanted to mention too, because this podcast isn't going to be for the sole purpose of just, crapping all over Capitals fans. I know, speaking on behalf of Deej here as well, TJ Oshie missed last night's game and announced today on Twitter that his father had passed away. So best wishes to TJ Oshie and his family there. Hopefully that serves as some proof to Caps fans that, hey, what we're saying isn't just a crap on the fan base, the team. They do have some likable players. And obviously, too, you look back to the Caps Stanley Cup win and the moment that TJ Oshie got to have with his dad on the ice. And that is a legendary moment in hockey history and one of those feel-good moments as well. So to TJ Oshie and his family, our thoughts go out to you. But with that said, Deej, shall we get into the Tom Wilson incident, which, we'll be honest, right out of the gates here, I view it as an incident. You are kind of on the side of, is it as big of a deal as some people are making it out to be? So this could end up being a pretty interesting conversation. I'm going to run down the incident for people who somehow might not have seen it. But before that, Deej, any general thoughts before we really get into it?
Well, so I think the reason, there's like a couple general thoughts I have, but basically, initially after like seeing the hand-selected, upvoted outrage porn posts on Reddit, I was like, well, let me find a live video of like what happened here. Because I don't know. I feel like people just love a villain. Like if somebody did something wrong, I feel like 1,000 people love to jump on that train and all bash the same person. Obviously, Tom Wilson's been on the end of that deservingly for most of the time. So when I saw what George Peros, well, I guess really the Department of Player Safety, really George Peros is just the figurehead. We'll get into that. But I think the reason that I have a different take was because I wanted to look at this and I was like, I want to see what George Peros saw in this incident, because I don't feel like there was any reason for them to there's no reason for them to hold back, right? Like there's no it's not like Tom Wilson has like really incriminating photos of George Peros or whatever, and I know that
we know of.
But so for me, I wanted to take a look at this the way George Peros saw this, right? And so, I think what happens, and if we're going over the incident, clearly everybody saw the same thing, right? Which is where this starts, which I don't think this necessarily starts with Tom Wilson punching Bushnevich in the shoulder. I think this starts with Mika Zibanejad.
Elaborate then. Elaborate before we get into the rundown of these points.
So to me, I think Tom Wilson made a mistake with the punch, right? I think that, he's definitely right to get fined for that. I agree. So basically, from what I understand, because I was like, why would Tom Wilson, a guy that's aware he's Tom Wilson, I mean, like when we talked about the his hit on Carlo earlier this year, like, you know, like I went through it, like Carlo moved awkwardly, like he was trying to make a board play. Like I know everybody was like, oh, Tom Wilson's back to his dirty ways, but I could definitely see it being a mistake, right? So my first thought was like, why would Tom Wilson punch Buchnevich in the shoulder? And basically what happens in this play, and you can't really see it on the GIF that everyone on Reddit's upvoting, but Zibanejad takes a real awkward whack at the goalie exactly where Buchnevich's skate is. So basically to Tom Wilson, from that angle, as far as I can rationalize why Tom Wilson would do this, it looks like Buchnevich kicks the goalie, right?
Okay, so with that then, just to set it up then, right? Because you kind of jumped, I guess, into it a little bit more than I thought. So
yeah,
for those who haven't seen the play,
let me frame my argument, because I just want to. Okay. I wanted to look at this incident as if Tom Wilson isn't like some horrific villain that's like a bully that like gets off on hurting people, which I think is how he's been spun. So I just wanted to like what would be going through his head. So that's like how I was looking at it.
Okay. I mean, like I said, if you have anything else to add, didn't mean to cut you off there.
Oh, well, I mean, like there's definitely like all throughout the incident, like I definitely just can explain how I thought it looked through Tom Wilson's eyes.
Yeah. So as I'm going through this, then at any time, if there's something that you disagree with, just say it. I have no problem with that. And like I said, there's a very good chance you and I are going to see things on a different level here, and I'm perfectly okay with that. So essentially this starts on a play in the offensive zone for the Rangers. Adam Fox gets it to Panarin over in the circle, tries to feed it to Buchnevich in front, who was tangled up with Trevor Van Riemsdyk throughout the duration of the play. Buchnevich, while the puck is loose in the crease, is jostling, which I think defensive Caps fans have labeled as kicking at their goaltender, which to me is just no, that is not.
See, I don't think Buchnevich kicked the goalie. I think Zibanejad had a very late slash, and I think from where Wilson was at that angle, it looked like Buchnevich kicked. That's what I think happened.
And see, in a way, if that's all it was, I think then you call it fair. The in-the-moment justification being what it is, whatever. From the outside perspective, it's okay. Buchnevich is tangled up with TVR. Okay, Zibanejad's involved in the play. Tom Wilson might have saw it this way. But Tom Wilson then jumps onto Pavel Buchnevich, drives him essentially headfirst into the ice, and then sucker punches him for good measure, whether it be the head, the shoulder, whatever. It's still ultimately a sucker punch. Again, Deej, if you have anything to add, feel free to jump in before I move on to the next point.
Well, so at this point, so basically, I feel like the drive into the ice is like more of I think that comes from this being seen in slow-mo. So like when I look at this, like I think the shoulder punch is a direct result of the supposed kick or whatever, right? And and then immediately, like Tom Wilson's next move, and this would make sense, right? As if like he wasn't necessarily trying to hurt Buchnevich, but obviously there's no love there. He reaches into his jersey to be able to grab him by the shoulder pads and get him out of the crease, right? So he's not trying to hurt him at any point here. He's trying to make sure his goalie's okay. Which I don't think there's like this really toxic culture around, I think even in fucking beer league, there's this really toxic culture around protecting your goalie. You know what I'm talking about? Like, obviously there's a level where it's necessary, but I think like it gets taken to the extreme. I think this is probably an example of that. So I don't know. I think that's what happened. I don't think he drove Buchnevich in the ice. It was an awkward play. Tom Wilson's very large. Buchnevich is not small by any means, but Tom Wilson's significantly larger than him. People fall awkward. The type of defense and crease protection Tom Wilson plays, I feel like just going to be driving downwards on people. And in a play like that, it's going to end up in an awkward situation.
You'd make for a good lawyer, buddy. After that, as Tom Wilson in the aftermath of throwing said sucker punch, Ryan Strome tries to defend Buchnevich, only to have another Cap jump on top of Strome. I think it was Trevor Van Riemsdyk. It might have been Brendan Dillon.
Yeah, it was.
Who was also in the mix. As well as Wilson gets up. And once TVR is already on top of Strome, Wilson also decides to I'm just going to punch Strome in the hip for whatever reason, because, boy, someone was sure feeling feisty. But I will say to that, Deej, before I let you jump in, so much for the theory of having guys out there to defend their players, because Ryan Strome was willing to jump in and defend Pavel Buchnevich. I don't know. To me, that whole you got to have guys out there to defend kind of reads like the, well, if you have more good people with guns, it'll stop the bad people with guns argument. And you can call out my correlation there if you want to. But it just seems like, no, that's not how it works. Just because you have these quote unquote tough guys out there who are willing to jump in and defend, the Rangers had multiple players who were willing to jump in and defend Buchnevich on this play, yet the outcome was still there, and Tom Wilson had no problem doing it, unless the argument is, well, you need this trained killer out there to defend, which, again, we'll also have other thoughts on that in a moment. But, Deej, your thought on the incident up to this moment?
So I think this is what, for me, and in my opinion of the events, I think this is what, for people who don't see it like I do, I think this is the big difference. Is so there's probably like 2-3 seconds after, I would say, what you would like a punch to the shoulder. He's trying to get Buchnevich after the crease. And so really what Strome does here, and I think there is a way to, like, you know, if we're going to say like defending your players is a thing and that should still be a part of hockey, I think there's a way to do it. What Strome did was he came up from behind Tom Wilson, stuck his fingers in Tom Wilson's eyes and grabbed him by the head, which is not a way you defend your players. Like that is so at this point,
I don't know. Like, maybe it is.
I mean, if you're going to say you should be able to eye poke and fucking hockey and then and sit there and say you shouldn't be able to defend your goalie, like, I don't know. I think you got to be able to pick a lane, but you don't eye poke somebody for a misunderstanding. Like, I mean,
after you see him punch your down
punch the guy in the fucking
shoulder.
shoulder, let's blind him. Like, I don't know. I think that's fucking stupid. And I think it's made even more fucking stupid by Ryan Strome's fucking Twitter rant. Like, get off your fucking high horse. Like, I don't know. So Ryan Strome pisses me off here because, like, he goes, he tries to blind Wilson, which is fucking stupid. Like, you don't grab a guy by the fucking head while he's on his knees, let alone with his eye sockets. Like, that's so fucking stupid. Because that's how you fucking permanently injure people.
Well, that's the thing, though. You mentioned with Tom Wilson in the whole justification of why he was after Buchnevich in the first place, this is what he saw. Could that same argument not then be made for Strome to say, oh, Tom Wilson just punched my down teammate in the head? I didn't know it was in the shoulder at the time. I just saw Tom Wilson sucker punch my teammate. So, yeah, I went after him and grabbed him in any way I could get a hold of him to get him off my teammate. Could you not make that same justification?
You don't put your gloved hand in another player's face. That is unwritten hockey. That is like, I mean,
it's also unwritten hockey to not punch a down man. But, you know, we're talking about, I mean, it's a scrum in the crease. He went for the guy's fucking eyes, right? Two wrongs don't make a right here is my level. That's where I'm at. So basically what happens here, Tom Wilson gets grabbed by the head after essentially being poked in the eyes by Ryan Strome. And within 2 seconds, he has 3 professional athletes punching him in the face. Rightfully so.
And then fucking he throws one of them off of him. Keep in mind, he just got poked in the eyes. One of them's on the ground, delivers one punch, sees that Panarin isn't wearing a helmet, and turtles over him. I think Tom Wilson handled this the best fucking way possible, and people are just outraged because people naturally need to be outraged and feel better about themselves by beating somebody up. That said, I fucking hate Tom Wilson. I hate violence in hockey. I hate people that take cheap shots. I fucking got a concussion my senior year by a guy that had no business ever touching the ice again. He put me in the fucking hospital. And fuck people like that. And so I feel the same way about players like Tom Wilson used to be. And I don't think he's that player anymore. I think it's too easy to jump onto that. And I think it's really easy to get on this Reddit circle jerk of, oh, we would never hurt people. We play hockey. Like, fuck Tom Wilson. Like, Tom Wilson hasn't done anything wrong for 4 years.
I don't know about that one, but hey, again, we'll get into that. I do have, well, hey, screw it. We'll talk about it right now. I do have the laundry list of Tom Wilson incidents The fact that there's a 9-minute compilation video on YouTube that's out there, but there was a list of incidents dating back to say 2015, including taking out one Lubomir Vishnevsky, a boarding call on Brian Campbell. Of course, these are around 2015, but even as of the end of 2019, crushed. I believe, and it wasn't Andreas Lilia, but it was Robert Lilia, or Jakob Lilia, who played for Columbus 2018, blindsided Brett Seney. So I disagree in that Tom Wilson isn't still deserving of the reputation that he earned, and I'll tell you why specifically. I don't disagree that he's not the same person anymore. I think he very much is. And the reason I say that, and it was going to be another moment that we were going to bring up here in a second, but the reason why I say that is his taunting of the Rangers bench with the flex when he's in the box. That is the same douche that it was a few years ago. That is the same douche who headshotted Brian Dumoulin a couple of years ago. It's the same guy. I disagree that he's changed. I will say, and we'll talk about his comments in a bit as well, but John Scott, talked about this whole incident and mentioned, hey, I like Tom Wilson for the fact that he plays on the edge, and I will agree, much like with someone like Brad Marchand. There have been moments where it was just an on the edge, not necessarily dirty play that people will jump to say that's a dirty goddamn play because of the reputation that player earned in the past. And I don't blame people for that because, again, those players like a Wilson, like a Marchand, have put themselves into that position to be labeled that easily because of their prior actions. So I will disagree with you in that sense, and I can continue on here with kind of the rundown as I saw it from watching the clip. But I disagree in that sense that Tom Wilson has improved in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I don't know. Personally, I just think he changed his game where he was not trying to. I mean, obviously, there's playing your game with an edge, right? I think that's entirely different than intentionally injuring people, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's a very black and white line. And I think for some players it gets gray and they need to figure it out. And I think after the Sundqvist hit that Wilson figured it out. Like I don't know. I guess personally I just don't. And that's the other thing too. Like, so let me wrap this up like in a way where, because I don't want my opinion to come off like it's just like being contradictory for the sake of entertainment or whatever. I wanted to be like, and I think this is the biggest problem with the whole situation, right? And I'm sure you'll agree with me on this. And I don't necessarily have a solution for it. But I wanted to know what was going through George Paros's head, right? That was the reason I decided to sit down and look at a situation like this. Because the Department of Player Safety made a ruling. Like, they knew that the mob was going to be after them after this. This is a widely publicized hit. So I wanted to know what George Paros was thinking. And that's the problem with the Department of Player Safety is they used to do those stupid review videos and they were dumb because they were inconsistent. So now they just stay silent. Yeah. And staying silent in a world where everybody believes everything is the most evil conspiracy possible. Like, that's not like the best way to phrase that because it seems reactionary. But like, if somebody is silent to you, you assume they're doing something shady, right? Like, if somebody's not transparent, you assume it's for a reason because something shady is going on. The Department of Player Safety is no longer transparent. Right. And I think that's the biggest problem here. If George Paros just said what I said and walked you through it frame by frame and explained what he thought, even if you disagreed with him, you would still be like, oh, well, George Paros is just an idiot, instead of being like, oh, George Paros is part of this fucking like thing to make hockey tough again. And that's why he's got the, whatever it is, the Violent Gentleman clothing brand or whatever. And I think that not being transparent undermines the intelligence of the fan and creates a more emotional reaction than it would be if you presented the facts from your angle. And I think that's what the Department of Player Safety needs to do.
Fair enough. So to continue on then, because we only talked about half of this incident so far, Artemi Panarin at that point where Wilson and Strome are tangled up, Panarin jumps in. Those two, as in Wilson and Panarin, get into a scrum. Wilson, of course, has his hands up. I see it as taking Panarin's helmet off. It wasn't the cleanest, let me just grab your bucket and throw it. But Panarin's helmet comes off. Wilson slams him to the ice. While I add grabbing Artemi Panarin by the hair from the back of the head as a part of this slam. Now, Greg Wyshynski mentioned that the NHL found no compelling evidence that Wilson threw Panarin down by pulling his hair, which again, LOL. There are videos all over Twitter and Reddit that clearly show, even with the gloved hand, that no, it's not like, okay, I have my hand here, but I'm not grabbing anything. I just have Wilson grabbed him by the hair. So you mentioned the unwritten rules in the code of hockey about things you don't do. You don't pull a player by the damn hair, which again, I mean, say what you want, two wrongs don't make a right. Did Strome go after Wilson's eyes? Maybe. Well, then Wilson, immediately responds. He's ahead now on the scoreboard with shit you don't do by grabbing Artemi Panarin by the back of the head. And again, I'll say this, right? Two different conversations to have here, but I'll say this. This isn't an instance of, this is the pussification of hockey. I grew up as a Boston Bruins fan. We are approaching 10 years since the Boston Bruins last won a Stanley Cup. I am very well aware of the tactics that they employed to get there and how they skirted by a lot of rules because playoff hockey is different and that whole bullshit. I get that. But at the end of the day, there has to be a line somewhere. And that brings me into the argument of, well, Panarin learned not to do that. He learned to stay in his lane. You're a fucking clown if that's your opinion. I'm sorry. And I have friends who have that opinion. Deej, that might even be your opinion, that Artemi Panarin, as a star player, should have known his place and not jumped in. But considering at a minimum, Panarin was the third Ranger to get involved in the incident with the referees not fucking doing anything, I don't know what else you're supposed to do as a star player. So, I mean, at the very least, I agree with the argument, the sentiment of tell me with a straight face that Tom Wilson, didn't at least try to drive one player's head into the ice, arguably two or three. So, I don't know. Deej, your take at that point before we continue on with just the incident itself, not even getting to the aftermath yet.
Well, so all right, so this is how I look at it, and I don't think this is like Panarin fucked around and found out. I think that's a stupid take. What I think happened is, this all happened within 2.5 seconds, right? So essentially, if somebody pokes you in the eye, it takes a whole lot fucking longer than 2.5 seconds to recover. So there's this insane narrative that Tom Wilson basically he somehow brailled his way to figuring out where the helmet was to remove it, to be able to suplex somebody, all after just getting his eyes poked. And I think that's ridiculous. I think at this point, there were just so many people around him. So many people were throwing shots at him. It's fight or flight response. You can't see. I think this was an unfortunate result of Ryan Strome poking him in the eyes. I think Panarin did the right thing. He stood up his teammates, saw what he did. I think this all stems from Strome going straight for Wilson's eyes, which is a huge, I think that was the dirtiest part of this play. And I think it's unfortunate how it ended. It's unfortunate that Panarin got hurt, but I mean, you're out of a playoff spot. I understand you're sticking up for your teammates or whatever. But I think, I don't know. I think that's what happens. You get poked in the eyes. It's 2 seconds. If Tom Wilson had intent to injure, he would have punched Panarin more than once.
I mean, perhaps. I mean, my argument, though, in terms of, the whole poke, like I said, Tom Wilson was in that situation to begin with because of Tom Wilson's actions, though. That's the thing for me, right? Where it's, man drives drunk. Well, he swerved out of the way to stop a woman from hitting a woman who was crossing the road. And once he spurned off into the ditch, he found a dying deer and gave that deer CPR and saved the deer. It's you were in that situation because you were driving drunk, were you not? So let's not, ignore, like I said, the whole two wrongs don't make a right thing, I suppose. But again, Tom Wilson found himself in this situation.
No, but I think
because he went overboard in the bullshit defending of a scrum. And that was a point made, which we can get into right now, I guess. I was going to save it for the aftermath, but Peter Laviolette, the head coach of the Caps, saying, I thought it was just a scrum. That type of thing happens a lot. Tom Wilson took it beyond the typical scrum. So again, like anything that might have happened to him with him being like, oh, well, I'm lashing out now because of what happened to me. It's like, well, motherfucker, you're the one that started this. That's my opinion, at least.
Well, so I think anybody that saw this can agree that Tom Wilson went beyond the typical scrum. That's why he got fined. I haven't even seen the most hardcore Capitals fan take be, oh, he shouldn't have even been fined. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, nobody has that
don't check
their subreddit. There's somebody. I'm sure if we look for it, we'll find somebody, right? So I think the reason he was only fined, there was no suspension after this, is all, even though that was a terrible decision, right? Every decision Tom Wilson made after that poor decision was only to defend himself. And I don't think you should get banned from a league for defending yourself from people that are attacking you violently, especially when you go out of your way to avoid additional strikes, like you did with Artemi Panarin. The second he realized, and this is like so hard for people to wrap their heads around because it's fucking Tom Wilson. He's the worst person ever. He's like fucking Hitler on ice. Fucking Tom Wilson.
Those people you don't listen to, though.
Well, that's
right?
I mean, we're creating an echo chamber for them if we don't point this out, which is the second Tom Wilson sees that Artemi Panarin's not wearing a helmet, he grabs Artemi Panarin's pants and he pulls him under himself to de-escalate the situation, turtle himself over, no more intent to harm anybody, gets everyone out of the situation. He did the right thing. And I was proud of Tom Wilson there, as big of a piece of shit as he is. As dumb as it was to start this whole situation by punching Buchnevich was a completely boneheaded decision that he got fined for. He should have been. I think that final action of him pulling in Panarin to himself the second he realizes that Panarin is not wearing a helmet is why I don't think he was just trying to fuck up as many people as possible, which I feel like is the take that a lot of people are running with. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that, like, oh, it's fine to punch people in the shoulders. Like, I think that was 100% worth a fine, and that's only because the NHL has the best players association. That's the only reason it was a slap on the wrist fine, is because the player association is basically a fucking corporate legal team at this point. And I mean, that's good for 99% of the league, like, in situations, but this is one where it's not necessarily a good thing for the league. So I don't know. That's how I look at it. That's my take.
I mean, I get what you're saying in that, yes, eventually you can't exactly call it a rampage because there was the example of some restraint shown, but also, on the flip side,
2.5 seconds, or that was 3 seconds after the man gets poked in his eyes, he shows restraint. Like, that's insane. Like, that is the mark of a man that knows he will be kicked out of the league if he does anything fucking stupid. And that's why I think that I feel like people are writing a narrative that doesn't exist here. You know what I mean, though? Like, picture somebody poking you in the eyes and then, like, 3 people are on you, and then 3 seconds later, you're like, oh, fuck, this guy's not wearing a helmet. I just want this to be over. Like, that takes some serious decision-making, even if you started it with something dumb like punching Buchnevich while he was on the ground. And I think, for me, that's what when I saw that, that's what originally made me conflicted over the idea and what caused me to want to look at this from Tom Wilson's perspective. Because originally I was like, oh, the guy's a fucking goon. But I figured there were enough people in power, including Laviolette, who's not really a troll of a coach, George Paris, obviously. I felt like I needed this to make sense in a way because I don't believe in villains, personally. That's my personal worldview.
I mean, I can't say that you're not right in that, yes, there was restraint shown. But like I said, it's one of those things where it's almost like a kid writing on the wall with crayon. And he's like, I drew a dog. Well, I could have drawn 4 dogs, but I only drew 1 dog. You know, you still got yourself in that situation. Regardless, I think we're just going to, I can see what you're saying. I am just still hesitant
Yeah,
to give
I
him
don't
credit.
even think I'm just being like contrarian here or
I know.
hot take. Like I genuinely want to walk you through my logic. And I think something important that I really just thought of while I was going through this, or while we were really preparing for this. And I think this is interesting, right? I don't think when you're determining if somebody is being punished for something, you don't take their past into account. Right? That's how our US legal system works. We decide if somebody's going to be punished for something, and then we take their past into account when determining the punishment. Right?
But the NHL does that in a way by having the repeat offender status, even though Tom Wilson at this time doesn't have it because it lapsed in part thanks to the break due to COVID.
Right. But so I'm saying that the repeat offender status isn't going to come up as a thing unless they've decided to punish you for something. You know what I'm saying? So I think they decided to punish Wilson for punching Buchnevich because that was a stupid ass move. And then I think they looked at it the way I did. Everything else was him in self-defense, and then he de-escalated the second he could see again. And I mean, that's the only thing that makes sense to me. I mean, clear, like that's the decision Peros made. And I think the dumbest part of this, of anything, and I know we'll get to this because I think this is going to be even more divisive. I think it was kind of fucking stupid of the New York Rangers to put out that tweet calling for Peros' resignation. I think that was
we will get to that. Yeah, we'll save your thoughts on that. We will get to that. Again,
that was so shocking to me. But yeah, we'll finish talking about that.
I mean, it's unprecedented in the hockey world, so definitely shocking. Just to finish up on the section I have titled "The Incident," Wilson, of course, was penalized, not ejected from the game. As far as I'm aware, at least as I recall, we're 24 hours removed from it. Taunts the Rangers bench by flexing, which again, oh, what a guy, what a man, potentially costing your team the game by taking penalties. I don't know. People will sit there and say the guy has, we'll call it whether it be lapses in judgment, potential anger issues, who's to say. It does bring me again right back to the point of Joffrey Lupul's stupid goddamn take of, well, the Rangers should have a look at their roster. A guy has to think twice about ragdolling and injuring your superstar, when you have a tough guy out there, which again, no. And like I said, there's a big difference between this incident and, say, the hockey code being enforced when you had, say, Wayne Simmons fighting Alex Edler after Edler returned from suspension from kneeing Zach Hyman. There's a drastic difference between the code, and it's incredible to me that Joffrey Lupul, a player who spent a lot of time injured, talks about the code. I don't know, maybe your lovely goon teammates of Colton Orr, Mike Brown, and Fraser McLaren should have stood up for you more, and maybe the Toronto Maple Leafs, led by Phil Kessel and James Reimer, would have actually won a Stanley Cup instead of blowing it in 2013. Joffrey, who's to say? Enjoy posting more on Instagram, considering you're not in the league anymore. Have fun with that. But, Deej, in terms of the incident itself, before we move on to the aftermath, anything else to add here before we continue on? Because this is obviously going to take up the majority of the show today.
Yeah, I think, well, so first let me paraphrase, or not paraphrase, but let me set up what I'm about to say like this. I think the code is stupid.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I know I'm going to lose some of you here, I think fighting should be completely out of the sport. I think the whole idea of you hurt our superstar is like, we're going to send somebody to beat you up. That is so absolutely medieval. You know what happens? You hurt our superstars, you sit out for 15 games because this isn't that league. So the NHL needs to grow the fuck up. They need to make it so that if people intentionally injure people, you don't have to send somebody out there to beat them up. Like, are we seriously basing an international sport on corporal punishment? Do you know how fucking stupid that is? Like, I can't stress enough. Like, the second you take it out of the hockey world, like, oh, fucking, like, you should never be able to hurt anybody. And that should never be a system of justice. That is not how the world works. And I'm sorry that we've become fucking attached like a bunch of old fogies smoking pipes outside a Cracker Barrel to this fucking idea of, oh, we got to beat each other up. I got news for you. If beating each other up is part of your rule enforcement system, you're fucking stupid. So let me paraphrase. So let me start with that. Before I say, I think the reason Tom Wilson flexed is because he took on 3 New York Rangers while he couldn't fucking see in front of an away crowd. I'd flex too. Total asshole move. Don't get me wrong. I think Tom Wilson's an asshole. Even if he's an improved person, I still think he's an asshole. I just don't think he's like this serial injurer that just lives to see people permanently unable to play anymore that he's been painted out to be.
I mean, I will say to that point, right? Like I said, I mentioned, like, okay, those are the type of people you don't listen to. Like, I think the people calling for, and it's tough though too, right? Because we saw examples in the past of players not being dealt with until it was too late with certain incidents. Obviously, someone like Matt Cook comes to mind, where it's just, how the hell was he even allowed to still be in a situation where he was allowed to end Mark Savard's career, essentially? And, you know, with Tom Wilson, it's the argument of, and we had this conversation before too about headshots, where my stance...
This was after the...
this was after the Carlo.
The Carlo hit in March. Okay.
Yeah, so like my stance on headshots is just flat out, if you headshot somebody that you're sitting out at least a little bit of time, your stance was, well, look at the circumstances, the gray area, certain players and the physicality. And, you know, that's certainly a debate. That's certainly a debate to have. But then it's also the situation here where, you know, you get into that conversation of, you know, whether it be fighting or incidents with these hits. And then, like I said, there are those people too, where you just don't listen to them when it comes to the idea of kicking Tom Wilson out. I think Tom Wilson should have been suspended. I don't think he should have been barred from the league. Do I think at this stage that Tom Wilson deserves a 40-some-odd game suspension a la Rafi Torres a few years ago that essentially ended his career? I do, because I personally do not see that growth, that change, where... Even with Brad, I think there's more of an argument that there's been that growth and change with Brad Marchand, but Brad Marchand still has his piece of shit moments. You know, if I'm not mistaken, it was Ty Smith that he essentially cross-checked in the back of the head. And we can get into that whole conversation of, hey, the NHL and its cross-checking issue and its enforcement issue, its officiating issue. It's all, like, this included, is all a part of that big jumbled mess that makes the NHL the biggest hockey league in the world, but arguably the worst. I don't think that's a hot take there to say the way that they handle their business, aside from the dollar amount, they're doing a pretty damn good job of that with these new deals, of course, with, you know, Sportsnet still in Canada and what they've done now with ESPN and Turner in the US. But it's all just a massive pile of shit. It's the only way to sum it up. Anything to add? Because I know I jumped around onto a couple of different points there before we move on to the aftermath.
I did just want to point out one more thing, and obviously this is just more food for thought. I don't really have a conclusion on this, but I think it's interesting just because I haven't seen anybody bring it up, right? So essentially, the root action that people want the suspension for, the offense is throwing Panarin onto the ice, right? That's what people are calling for justice over.
I think the punch and then... yeah, throwing Panarin down. I think a lot of people still would have been calling for a suspension off of the punch, and I don't necessarily disagree, but it's the punch in conjunction with the takedown where people are like, how the hell was this not at least a couple games minimum?
So I think, so this is what I haven't seen anybody bring up, right? Well, the last time somebody got suspended for a takedown was Mike Matheson on Elias Pettersson, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you have to compare the moments. And I think the big difference here is Mike Matheson wasn't trying to defend himself, right? Like Matheson had a few seconds to figure out what was going on. Like he physically picked up Pettersson. And I think like, and I don't know necessarily what to take away there, but I think this is a significantly worse incident, or a significantly less bad incident from that, because you judge, I feel like the Department of Player Safety, their ethos with these things is to judge not by results, but by intent.
I agree with, I think that's how they see it. Whether or not that's right or wrong is obviously a different conversation. So I'll agree
I think
with
that depends on who you are, what type of player you were, if you were a player on the NHL. Like there's just, I think even between people who agree on how this should have ended up as a suspension or not will be different on whether you should judge this by intent or result. And so for me, in general, I think in a game as chaotic as ice hockey, where, you know, you got 200 feet of ice being shared by 12 big ass dudes, I think you need to, personally, I think you should judge intent instead of result, because there's too much chaos on the ice at all times. So I don't know. That said, don't get me wrong. I think Tom Wilson's an asshole. I think he fucking used to be a piece of shit. I think he's done better. I know a lot of people disagree with me there. I'm by no means am I a Capitals fan or even a Tom Wilson stan. So I just needed to, for me and the way I look at the world, my sanity, I needed to get inside George Paros's head. And that's, I guess he supposedly won me over.
All right. So with that, we'll move on to, I guess, what we're going to call
Department of Player Safety.
Oh, we'll be talking about him plenty still. Don't worry. So we'll get to what I call the aftermath here, which really started, I'd say, within an hour of the game happening, with the Washington Capitals official Twitter account tweeting what was essentially LOL, Tom Wilson lives rent-free in your heads.
Oh,
now,
Jesus.
To that tweet, I'm sorry, but I don't think you can just chalk it up to a rebellious social media manager. That would be ignoring the simple fact that, much like, and again, I'll always bring this up because there will be some people who obviously go to the whataboutism. Oh, you're a Bruins fan. What about Brad Marchand? You can't judge Tom Wilson. What about Brad Marchand? Which is just fuck those people. If you're one of those people, turn off my show. Go the fuck away. I don't want you here.
Yeah, whataboutism's fucking stupid.
It really is. And every aspect, essentially. But there is no denying that a large portion, I will not say the majority, but a large vocal portion of the Caps fan base over the years have doubled down with Tom Wilson and will essentially defend his shitty actions by using shit like LOL, rent-free, you're just mad, you wish you had a player like Tom Wilson on your team. The bullshit like that we all know is just, it's just annoying and pointless to argue with. Correct. Obviously, you have at this stage now, and Deej mentioned the Rangers tweet, which I'll bring up in a few minutes here, but the Caps will not be responding to the Rangers statement. They're going to let the NHL handle it, per a team spokesman. So good to see it. They shut the fuck up now. But yeah, ultimately, with the Caps, you had this tweet, which only added fuel to the fire. And I mean, you want to talk about, you know, some of the other subjects that we'll bring up here, but at the end of the day, you had that tweet out, which again only stoked this issue. And like I said, I don't think you can just chalk it up to someone, you know, the social media manager going off and doing their own thing. That is very much a part of the Caps as a team and their fan base, is that attitude. But yeah, a very poor look. And as Deej has alluded towards as well, Tom Wilson fined $5,000, which was the maximum allowable under the CBA. So, Deej, I agree with you in that the NHL, in terms of a player CBA, have one of the best, if not the best, in North American professional sports.
Oh,
the
they
fact
easily
that,
have the best. That
someone only gets a $5,000 fine out of this for what was deemed roughing against Pavel Buchnevich. Now, a friendly reminder here as well. And Deej mentioned the lack of transparency, and that's a big thing, right? Because you look back to Henrik Lundqvist in 2014. This was a big example that was brought up here. Deej, he was suspended in 2014, or excuse me, he was fined in 2014, $5,000. Did you see this? Do you know what Henrik Lundqvist was fined the same amount of money for as Tom Wilson back in an incident in 2014?
I am, and I also so there is the this is the water bottle issue, right?
Yes, Henrik Lundqvist squirted water at Sidney Crosby and was fined the same amount as Tom Wilson. So
again, I don't think we can bring that up immediately after we said whataboutism's fucking stupid. I do want to point out
Well,
that,
I will say this is more of a positive whataboutism to say, how is this the standard of, I'll say, officiating and call it the Department of Player Safety? How is that the standard? Whataboutism for me, in a negative sense, is the gun versus seatbelt debate, where people are like, oh, well, we make people wear seatbelts. You don't see people like, that's a shitty whataboutism. Pointing out the hilarious inconsistencies when it comes to what we see here with player fines, I think, is a fair whataboutism. But anyway, continue.
It's important to I forget his name, but the Department of Player Safety at the time in 2014, he was fired a month after this. I think that's very important, or like whatever word they used instead of fired. So I think that's important here to take into mind. Because I don't think we can treat the Department of Player Safety as this constant thing when there have very, very much, at least in my opinion, been very different regimes in how they handle things. And sometimes within that own regime, like significant inconsistency. But I feel like this Peros regime has been, I feel like I personally can predict them the way I look at this stuff. So I don't know. I find that the Peros regime has been predictable. I think this is, I really don't enjoy this comparison, especially because it's just like they don't take into account that, like Sidney Crosby had just been shoved onto his back, and then Lundqvist just casually skates by and sprays this directly in his face as he's falling. Like, it's very much like, it's a shitty thing to do. And I'm not trying to compare these two events. The only thing that was the same with them is the punishment. And like I said earlier, because the NHLPA is so good, like you're gonna get fantastic RFA rules. You're going to get the waiver system. You're going to get the buyout system. All these things that make it so the players have better lives and are taken care of. It's not like they can just void their contract and send them off to the river like you can in the NFL. The NHL players are taken care of, and this is a clause to that. And I am telling you right now, regardless of if you think this 5,000 thing is frivolous, which it basically is, I mean, it's the maximum punishment. It's essentially they just put a mark down next to your name for future references. And if you come up against the Department of Player Safety again, it doesn't necessarily make you a repeat offender, but it's important for them to note, which is why this is here. You will never see this increase over 5,000. The NHLPA is too good. They will fight this tooth and nail because it's possible to get fined for something stupid, like Henrik Lundqvist throwing this water bottle, which, don't get me wrong, was something dumb for Lundqvist to do. But this is capped for a reason. Because if this was uncapped, then they could just fine you whatever the fuck they want. And the NHLPA would never have that. There needs to be a cap. They're never going to raise that number because they got them to agree to this number. So I think that's kind of like I don't want to say a moot point, but you know what I mean? It's stuck. It's the bad that comes with so much good from having such a good player association.
I'll say, too, one of the other funny examples was that, of course, Sean Avery in his infamous sloppy seconds interview was suspended 6 games for that. So I'll just say these inconsistencies have been here for a while. As well, of course, as you alluded towards, Artemi Panarin out for the game, out for the season at this stage. And I'll say this, too, with my arguments. I'm not arguing for, Tom Wilson should have gotten more simply because Panarin was injured. I still say the actions that were taken were, worthy of their being. That's, further discipline than what we saw. It's not just, and it was the same thing when Tom Wilson hurt Brandon Carlo, which again, I viewed as a suspension worthy hit. He was suspended. I thought it should have been for more. That is what it is. But again, it wasn't simply because Carlo got hurt, but it was ultimately because, again, the play itself, I think, warranted that further discipline. We'll move on to another aspect of this story because it is seemingly never ending unless you have something to add.
I do. I feel like I need to add something light in the middle here just because, obviously we're just really tearing the issues apart. I do have a favorite Sean Avery fact. You mentioned Sean Avery. So my favorite Sean Avery fact is that in 2017, his own mother-in-law got a restraining order against him. So that's my favorite Sean Avery fact. I don't know why I think that's so funny. There were probably obviously very horrific events behind it, but your own mother-in-law, like getting a restraining order against you, is just like there's something very like innately I don't know, Curb Your Enthusiasm-esque comedy about that I find delightful.
Fair enough. So with that, Deej, it's time for your favorite part of this, the statement that was released by the New York Rangers this afternoon, saying this: the New York Rangers are extremely disappointed that Capitals forward Tom Wilson was not suspended for his horrifying act of violence last night at Madison Square Garden. Deej, do you have a point there, or should I keep going?
No, keep going. Like, keep going. I'm fascinated by this whole statement. I don't really have a take on it. I'm just really fascinated that this is something that happened so suddenly.
Yeah. Wilson is a repeat offender. Asterisk to that, not by definition with the Department of Player Safety, because again, that time passed, but technically, yes. Wilson is a repeat offender with a long history of these type of acts, and we find it shocking that the NHL and their Department of Player Safety failed to take the appropriate action and suspend him indefinitely. Wilson's dangerous and reckless actions caused an injury to Artemi Panarin that will prevent him from playing again this season. We view this as a declaration of duty by the NHL head of player safety, George Parros, and believe he is unfit to continue in his current role. Deej, you mentioned just this moment itself. My God. I mean, has anything ever happened like this before?
So, all right. So this is a God, and this really upsets me because it's going to piss people off, and I really wish instead they would take this advice because it's the best piece of advice I have to give and that I will ever give. The most important thing you can learn to be a member of today's society, especially mostly the English-speaking world, in 2021. And for the last few years, the most important thing you can learn to be a good person and to be a contributor to society in a way that is meaningful and in a way that will bring meaning to your life is to learn how to detect spin in articles and in statements. It is a difficult skill to learn. Work on it. So when the Rangers say some bullshit like Artemi Panarin's out for the rest of the season, when they mean 3 fucking games, like, you just, if there is a reason for you to call out the NHL and ask somebody to resign, you stick to the facts. You don't spin them in a way that tries to create an emotional response, because then you're not going to get the response you're asking for because you didn't stick to the facts. You editorialized that Panarin's out for 3 games by saying the rest of the season, like as if it's like this catastrophic injury. And I think that's what upset me about this statement. Like, the whole statement's super bizarre, but I really, when they stick to that rest of the season comment, they're trying to pull on people's heartstrings to cost someone his job, which is insane. Like, for a professional sports team to do that I don't know. That absolutely shocks me that they would, I don't know. Like, you know what I'm talking about though, right? Like, like their word choice is absolutely shocking to me when they are trying to get something unprecedented to happen. Like, if you are trying to make that big of a change, you stick to the facts. You don't spin stuff. I don't know. Like, I don't think they did something wrong. Like, clearly they felt very strongly about this, but I think it's important to be able to detect spin and when somebody's trying to emotionally manipulate you. So the Rangers are trying to manipulate anybody that reads this into assuming that Panarin's career is fucked when the dude's out for 3 games. Like, they don't mean to be manipulative. Like, clearly they're just emotionally behind this. But things like that are manipulative. They are. Because they are presenting the truth as something more. Like, they are adding an emotional attachment to the truth that makes you feel as if they said something else that is untrue. And so I don't know. The spin on this bothered me.
I can tell. And the thing is, though, like, The basis behind it, I don't disagree with, though. You know, like, you're not wrong.
Right. Yeah. Like, I don't think they were in
way.
a bad place to do this. Like, I totally understand.
Yeah, no, I think you're wrong to that point. For me, I mean, yeah, it is just the shocking nature of it, right? Where, like you mentioned, the fact that this just hasn't happened before. And ultimately, again, you look at it, and you're right. You know, they are putting their own spin on this and what this could mean. And people are joking like, oh, they'll probably get a bigger fine than Tom Wilson did. And yeah, probably.
Yeah, they will. They've got a terrible... The team association sucks. I don't know if you've seen the lockouts. But holy shit, they are going to get slammed.
Yeah, so I mean, it's one of those things where... I'm not going to say if it was the right or wrong way to make that statement of, hey, we're unhappy about Tom Wilson, because I think it's made for great theater. So I won't say it was the wrong way to go about it.
I think it's the wrong way if you want results. I think I think I have, so as somebody that, and this is going to go back to my point, that I tried to watch this whole situation from what was going on in George Paros's head, because I refuse to believe that George Paros is like part of some old boys club that's trying to keep violence in hockey. Like I understand why he's been labeled with that. I don't think that exists. I think the NHL is a very well-organized league, and I don't think they would name somebody that doesn't care about cleaning up the game, the head of the Department of Player Safety. So I think my issue with this is they are essentially trying to make George Paros feel so bad, because they're not going to get George Paros fired, but they might get him to resign with colorful language that doesn't necessarily accurately represent the event. And I think that's what bothers me.
I mean, I think we could take this whole podcast as a kind of rundown for what this has been, but
yeah, I think I don't know. I think it's really, I think at the end of the day though, and so there are two things that I want to bring up here. Because one I wanted to bring up earlier, I didn't really touch it. But the first thing is that I don't know if you've seen the Washington Capitals Twitter since that tasteless fucking bullshit bully ass live in your head post was posted. But they cleaned it up. It's all facts now. It's like we have a game scheduled on Monday, May 9th. So I think they did fire a social media manager, like because their ducks got in a row real quick. I don't know if they necessarily fired somebody, but he may be on paid leave. That said, I think the second part of this that is so fascinating to me is, and this is why I mentioned that I think the guy got fired. They asked the Capitals if they had a response to the Rangers, and they said no. So I think I really enjoy how the Capitals know some shit's about to go down with the NHL and the Rangers, and they're just like, yeah, we're good. We think this whole situation's fucked, and we don't want to talk about it anymore.
Well, what that in terms of George Paros as well, because I mean we've talked about him a bit here, but as you mentioned, aside from the absurdity that a former goon who owns Violent Gentlemen, and of course the tagline being "Make Hockey Violent Again," aside from the absurdity that is the current leader of the Department of Player Safety, I very much disagree with the thought of, well, who better then to run it than someone who actively partook. Like, and again,
yeah, I think that's stupid.
I know that I go overboard with some analogies on occasion, but to me, that's like saying, well, a mass murderer should help us make the gun laws because, hey, who else would know better than a guy who murdered people with an assault rifle? Like, I don't know. Maybe the victim of a goon like that. Paul Correa is a name that gets thrown out there a lot. I think Paul Correa could be great. On the gun topic, I think, hey, someone who was very much affected by this could probably do a better job than the mass murderer. You get the point anyway. with George Peros, though, again, it's being reported now that he didn't want to even suspend Tom Wilson for the Brandon Carlo hit, which caused him to miss 2 months. And of course, the concussion issues as a result of that. Apparently, it was Gary Bettman above him that said, well, the optics of not suspending him look rough, so we should suspend him for something. So what does George Peros even do? And my biggest issue with this, Deej, in terms of the Tom Wilson non-suspension, at least suspend him. At least suspend him for the Ranger game. Because you cannot tell me that your target is to promote the skill of the sport when you don't suspend Tom Wilson, because by not suspending him, you are actively promoting the violence of the game. You are selling that rematch on Wednesday, essentially with the promise of there will be blood, there will be retaliation. So to me, this screams, not only are you sending mixed messages and really kind of shining a spotlight on yourself about what you're actually trying to promote, but it is also more about the money than player safety by not suspending Tom Wilson here, because you care more from the optics that you're setting about the money and the ratings that you're going to generate on that next game more than you care about the standard of player safety. And I'm not surprised by that, because again, talk about the league as a whole, it's a bit of a joke. The standard of low officiating, the actions or lack thereof. Then you have this with the Department of Player Safety. It's all just brutal.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think the issue, so there's a couple issues that I think, so I think the issue with Peros has nothing to do with his past. It's not like he owns, he's a minority partner in this clothing brand. It's more spin when people bring up the violent gentleman thing or whatever. Like, George Peros worked his way up through the Department of Player Safety. He's been there for 3 regimes. Specifically when they named him the head of it, I don't know if you saw this, but the reason they said they named him is because, here's a guy who played the game with an edge. He was an enforcer, and he never once got fined or suspended. So their idea was that he understood where the line was, right? The issue with George Peros, and I think in a way that I'm trying to avoid having an emotional reaction to all this, is kind of how I look at it, right? I think the issue with George Peros is he doesn't fucking know how to communicate with the fans. And now they've all turned on him. They got fucking pitchforks. I don't even think he did anything wrong, and they're ready to fucking burn the house down. And I think the only thing he did do wrong is he doesn't really talk about the decisions he makes, which initially I could see being a good idea given the backlash that talking about the decisions before. But the backlash was not them talking about the decisions. The issue was not the decisions they made when talking through them. The issue was the inconsistency. And I think they avoided it altogether without ever addressing the issue of the inconsistency of suspensions. And I think just shutting that department altogether was such a terrible idea. That said, I really hate the idea of bringing a victim mentality to the Department of Player Safety, where, this guy got fucked up, so he hates everybody that fucks people up. Those people are the enemy to him. I really hate the idea of bringing in somebody that is put to this platform because it comes wholeheartedly from a place of vindictiveness. I think if you want to install players that have been in this issue, you make a rule review committee. You change the rules if you want to avoid this stuff. You don't bring in a guy to weigh as a judge on hit to hit. You bring consistency to it. I think that's the issue. I think you can't be a judge and have a victim mentality, which I think is what people are pushing here.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's just so many different ways to look at it. And I'll bring this up, too, right? When it comes to George Peros, I mean, the conversation is out there, too, that, hey, look, at the end of the day, he's a figurehead, right? Does it go beyond him?
It's
you look
a huge
and say,
department.
You look at Colin Campbell, you look at Gary Bettman, you do look at the NHLPA, and of course it's so weird too because, you talk about the incidents with Tom Wilson this year. Brandon Carlo is the Bruins NHLPA rep. Panarin is the rep for the Rangers. Wilson's the rep for the Caps, and there's just so many different, I guess, ramifications of it. And it comes down to the point where Alan Walsh, again, like super agent in the league, like he's saying, like, hey, remember that this is on Gary Bettman. You're getting that from the guy who posted the Flurry sword meme a year ago, less than a year ago. So it's just interesting to see how many takes have been out there. And one of the more interesting ones that are out there, I was going to bring it up earlier, but I figured I'd leave it for, where I initially thought it would be. But Emily Kaplan kind of mentioned the DOPS train of thought here, which, you talk about the incident, like the fall on Buchnevich wasn't viewed as much, which is pretty much what you were saying. The punch is what he got fined for, and everything after is just stuff that happens on a regular occurrence. It's just been interesting to see all the takes that have been out here, though.
Yeah, and I liked Emily Kaplan's tweet. Well, so I liked it and I disliked it. I liked it because she was trying to present what the Department of Player Safety thought, and then immediately, if you look at the responses, they're like calling for her job, which is fucking crazy. That said, I don't like that she just lumped the incident as everything that happens afterwards, right? I think it's a little dismissive of the initial thought behind her post. So I liked that she did it because not enough people were like, I don't know, I didn't think it was that big of a deal. As somebody that wants to take fighting, violence, and dirty hits out of hockey, I don't know, I enjoyed the thought process because I feel like for the most part, people are having a difficult time approaching this from a non-emotional standpoint, which is what you have to do when you're making big decisions. So I don't know. It's a mixed bag.
Now, I'll say this too. Mentioned John Scott earlier in his comments. He did, in fairness, and I'm intrigued at your take because obviously you kind of mentioned George Parros and your thoughts on this. John Scott outright calling Tom Wilson's actions gutless. Your take on that, considering we are talking about the perspective of, okay, well, how George Parros would view this, but here's another guy who was in the league for the same reason as George Parros, and here are his thoughts on the situation. So what do you think there?
I don't know. I don't want to be dismissive of John Scott because I think his career, what he was able to accomplish, he's Reddit's favorite player, right? I think that's the best way to describe John Scott is he's Reddit's favorite hockey player. And so I don't know. It bothers me in a way that he. I guess what bothers me is that I don't, as somebody that doesn't necessarily think that this was him attempting to injure, as somebody that can look at this from the perspective of Tom Wilson not trying to necessarily permanently injure anybody because it happened so fast. I think that punch to the fucking shoulder was gutless. I think it was stupid. I think it was completely unnecessary. And I think for a guy that's been suspended before for causing injuries, at one point he was suspended for punching an unsuspecting opponent, which is, I think punching an unsuspecting opponent that you injure is way different than throwing people off you when you've been blinded. And so I think there's this weird false equivalency that John Scott's pushing that is only being brought to the spotlight. It is being brought to because Reddit loves this guy so much. And don't get me wrong, I like John Scott too. I don't think his opinion's relevant here. I think he's been out of the game too long, and I don't think this particular incident was anything like any of the stuff he was involved in. I think John Scott is just I used to be a violent guy. Here's my John Scott's level of violence is different than Tom Wilson's. Is I think my take, and I think it's very odd for John Scott to even chime in this anymore. Does he have a book coming out? Like, you know what I mean? I don't know. It's odd to me.
He as
and
well.
I like John Scott.
He as well called out George Peros, which has been a common theme here, as you can tell. And on top of that, he did bring up this point. Whether it's right or wrong, and I think in your opinion, based off of this situation, to be viewed as wrong as this being the justification. But John Scott's viewpoint is that it's now officially open season in scrums. Because why wouldn't certain players just say, oh, well, yeah, Tom did this, so how are you going to do anything to me for this? Has essentially the line been pushed further back? Again, whether that's right or wrong, who's to say, but especially in the playoffs with how that is, where is the line going to be in the playoffs, especially when a moment like this happens when some teams only have, like you said, 3 games left?
Well, and I think that's an issue that we could talk about for hours, and I think it's that, and I hate to be dismissive of that comment, because this will just open another can of worms, but we both know that line changes in the playoffs. The playoffs are reffed differently. Suspensions work different. Like, what would be 10 games in the regular season is 1 game in the playoffs. And I think that's part of the problem. And I feel like I really want to believe in Peros here. He's Princeton educated. He finished his degree before he ever played in the NHL. So I just really wish this all happened differently, and I wish the NHL would have at some point in the last 8 years or however long it's been gotten the Department of Player Safety together. They've had long enough. And I don't necessarily think Peros is the problem. I think the fact that Peros has to answer to the NHL governing body above him is the problem.
And in the aftermath,
issues.
And I don't think you're wrong. I mean, in the aftermath of this too, Sean Avery was asked, of course, his thoughts on this. He just said he'd run the other team's goalie to show that there were consequences rather than getting in a fight with Tom Wilson. So shout out to Sean Avery for his level-headed addition to this as well. Even Matt Cook voiced his opinion on this. Like, he was asked, it seems that at times Tom Wilson goes out of his way to create risk.
What prison did they go to? Did they just go to a prison and interview all these guys at once?
Apparently. It seems that Wilson goes out of his way to create a risk that wouldn't otherwise exist. Can that be coached out of a player? And, Matt Cook had to say, it's about recognizing the scenario, the position you're in, the other guys, all that time and all that stuff. And again, it's interesting because you have the stance of, well, Wilson got poked in the eyes. He was reacting to that. I don't know if a lot of people saw that or if they believe that's the case. Even Matt Cook was saying Wilson looked like a toddler having a fit with this last one. To me, what he did has nothing to do with hockey. It comes down to respect for your opponents, the ability to control emotions within the scenario. So it's interesting how even players, Deej, who might have been in that scenario once upon a time don't seem to be siding with Wilson or having any sort of, I guess, the word's escaping me right now, but essentially being like, well, I've been in his shoes and I understand that situation.
Well, so I'll bring this up, and I hate to be so cynical about it. You brought something up earlier, right? You were talking about the Wednesday night rematch and the finances behind that. If you're Matt Cook and you agree with Tom Wilson, you're fucked. The internet turns on you. You've been canceled. So if you're reached out for comment and you have the ability to reclaim 10 minutes of fame and agree with people that hate you and make them like you all of a sudden, you're gonna fucking do it. I don't care if you're John Scott. I don't care if you're Matt Cook. Fuck Sean Avery, but in a weird way, I appreciate the bizarre performance art his life has turned into here. Where, of course, he said that. So it bothers me to see irrelevant people jump on the train of a popular opinion, because it seems so disingenuous to me.
In fairness, every response is the meme. Worst person you know makes one valid point. So that's been nothing but the response to Matt Cook's take on the situation. One final thing here, then, Deej, before we move on from this. I didn't think we'd get an hour, and 13 minutes already out of this topic of conversation, right? But David Quinn's comments, head coach of the New York Rangers, on how will the Rangers respond tomorrow. I know how we're going to respond. I'm comfortable with how we're going to respond. And as far as the call-up goes, we've talked about a lot of different scenarios. Again, the NHL is just promoting blood and guts. AEW Wrestling is promoting blood and guts on Wednesday Night Dynamite. The NHL is also promoting blood and guts on Wednesday. It is going to be must-see hockey, but Jesus Christ, this entire situation could have very much been avoided even with just a single game suspension, and you would have caught just as much flack for that single game suspension. So maybe that's why they didn't do it. They're like, well, if we suspend him for a game, well, then the ratings aren't going to be as good. So we'll just give them the fine, rile people up, and people will watch anyway.
Yeah. So this team, I don't know how they're going to respond, right? So this team that got 3 goals against the Capitals, including that game, have scored 4 goals in their last 4 games. You don't respond on Wednesday night because you did it on Twitter. You responded. Congratulations, Rangers. You responded. Great. I don't like. I think it's a non-issue at this point. Like the Rangers are going to get fucking blown out tomorrow. Like that's just what's going to happen. Like this team has no reason to play. Like maybe they'll show up. But the Capitals are still playing for something. Are a significantly better team. And they didn't whine about the game on Twitter, which I feel like I don't like to use the word whine. That's spin. There's lesson 2. But the Rangers responded. They responded on Twitter. You could have stayed quiet. You could have responded on the ice. And I'm not saying like old school rule for rule, send your goons out and beat everybody up hockey. I'm saying you respond with good sound hockey and you beat the fucking pants off the team that had to resort to violence. That's not how the world works. Let's see who they call up to replace Panarin. I'm sure it won't be Tony DeAngelo.
Could you imagine? Tony DeAngelo.
Congratulations, Tony. Fight Tom Wilson. You get one last day in the sun. No. Nobody's going to like you if you win. No. It's fine.
No, people are going to love it even more if you lose somehow. It's a real lose-lose for you.
Go ahead, Tony. You're the new Spartacus. Welcome.
So with that, we'll move on to some viewer questions here. I will say our division breakdown, maybe we'll push it off. I don't know. We'll see how we feel after asking these questions because, again, we are having to record this a little bit later in the day, unfortunately. And that brings us to our first viewer question. This was from one Z-Pops on Twitter. How was your day today? And to answer that question, I have had nothing but audio issues over the past 24 hours, which Deej has hopefully been able to work his magic on to, have this be somewhat presentable. So yeah, it's been atrocious. I've been stressed out as hell. It's been a fun time.
Yeah, as Dogecoin is now up 10 cents since we started recording, I'm having a great day. I, as you may recall from previous episodes, was heavily invested in Dogecoin, and I don't know, things are looking up. Might even go to the dick store tomorrow. Get a new dick. We've got Dogecoin money. No, I had a pretty good day. I've been dealing with vestibular migraines, which is why I'm talking to you in the black void. But I had a pretty good day. I did some light workouts. I'm working on my. In addition to the beer league stuff, I read this crazy article about how grip strength translates to wrist shot strength. So I've just been sitting here fucking squeezing this thing while talking to insurance companies on the phone. Surprisingly good combination. Almost the cookies and milk of stress.
Oh boy. This is from Jared on Twitter. Is tofu actually good? TH, I have had limited experiences with tofu, primarily in the form of my sister baking stuff and being like, hey, I'm not going to tell you what's in it. It's tofu. It's fine. It's fine. Depending on how you prep it, I'm sure.
Okay. So I actually have I have a pretty recent. Well, not recent, but I've got a decent thing to this. So I'm not big on tofu, right? Like I'd never just eat tofu. Specifically, so what is tofu, right? Like I feel like I should address this because like tofu to me is like, especially in the world of the Beyond Burger and Beyond Meat and all that stuff, it's kind of like a relic of the 90s. So in case you're like listening to this and you're like, tofu, I've heard of that. What is it? Basically, you kind of make like a paste out of soybeans, and essentially it like makes like kind of a milk, and then you turn that into cheese, right? So basically it's like a soybean cheese. Not a great way to explain it, but it's the closest thing we can do in English. I love miso soup. I love sushi. I am a big sushi eater. Could be because I live close to the ocean. But miso soup traditionally served at Japanese restaurants with sushi. It's basically a very salty broth with tofu. You get some fucking leaves in there, and it's great. I love it. So I like tofu, but not as a meat substitute. I like it as a soup additive.
There's way more on tofu than I thought we were going to get, but here we are. You never quite know what to expect.
Subject somehow.
You never quite know what we're going to get on this show. From one Maniac Joe on Patreon, bit of an off-the-wall possible bonus podcast question. Well, guess what? Joe, you got onto the main show. Dinner for 5 of you and current NHLers with 1 forward, 1 defenseman, 1 goalie, and a coach. Who are you taking and just talking hockey with? That is a loaded question.
Talk hockey?
Yeah, so we'll start with forwards.
Oh,
1 forward, everything. 1 current NHL forward that you'd want to be able to talk hockey with. I'm trying to think of who wouldn't be the most boring. Who has a decent amount of personality that isn't just like toxic masculinity dude bro personality. Anybody coming to mind for you? Because I have my answer.
You go ahead and answer. I gotta think about this for a second.
Brad Marchand. Because I feel like modern day, probably somewhat calmed down in his personal life. Pretty sure he's a dad, Marchand. I feel like he'd be an interesting person to talk about here, where he wouldn't be, like I said, too like Rob Gronkowski. But he also, I feel like Patrice Bergeron would be a little bit, like a lot more reserved, you know? And it'll make sense why I'm taking Brad Marchand when you hear who my defenseman pick is. But yeah, Brad Marchand for forward. And president.
Okay. All right, and president. I guess maybe current offensive player. So let me explain this pick, right? For me, I would want it to be somebody who's won the cup and somebody who's very smart at the same time, because I feel like you could ask some crazy questions and they will have thought about the game at a very interesting level.
Harvard educated, no mask wearing Alex Killorn?
Yeah, that's exactly who I was going to go with.
I had a
Alex Killorn.
Sorry for ruining that for you.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like it's a Florida cultural thing. Like the I know like the mask thing drove you nuts. Like if I feel like if you saw the day-to-day of what Florida looks like on a daily basis, you would understand why it wasn't that big of a deal. But that's
I don't think, much like with certain topics surrounding Tom Wilson, I don't think you can just explain it away by saying, Florida. Tom Wilson. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a
but then again,
one of those
you
things
live
where
it.
you have to live here to understand that like nobody at any point gives a fuck around you about mass or safety in Florida. I understand. I don't know. I mean, like, I'm not going to hold that against him. It's a cup parade or whatever. Like, obviously, it's a stupid decision, but I still sit down with dinner with the guy.
Fair. So for defensemen, again, Marchand was my pick for forwards. My defensive pick is PK Subban.
Interesting.
I think that would be a phenomenal dynamic between the two.
I feel like I would ask him too many questions about his dad. I feel like I would need to know about the book. Defenseman, huh? Let's see. Okay. All right. Here's my answer is Dougie Hamilton.
Ooh, good one.
Dougie Hamilton, famously museum goer, presumably pays over the minimum donation for entry. I don't know. I feel like Dougie Hamilton would be interesting to talk with, because I don't know. Whenever I in the very limited interactions I've had with NHL defensemen, it seems like it's always standard, like, you just got to get out there, play for the team, you get pucks deep, like that stuff.
Yeah, it really does. For goaltender, ooh, I'm leaning towards Marc-Andre Fleury or Tuukka Rask, so I can talk to him about Metallica. I'm going to go with Tuukka. I didn't want to make it too Bruin-centric, but talking Metallica with Tuukka Rask sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah. That actually doesn't sound too bad. I would enjoy that.
Bad.
All right. Fleury, I feel like, would be incredibly interesting to talk to. I mean, he's got the cups. Like, he's an incredibly great athlete. Like, he went through presumably an intense sports psychology program. Like, I don't know if you remember that a few years ago, where the Penguins basically had to create a sports psychology department to get Marc-Andre Fleury back on his game. I feel like that would be interesting to ask questions about. You could ask him about, like, Sid and Malkin. So I don't know. Maybe that is my answer. The more I think, either him or a second place Cam Talbot, because I just want to know what it's like to get out. Like, what is that sense of freedom you feel leaving Alabama for the NHL?
And last but not least, for coach, Craig Berube, because I want to ask him if he still has any self-pride as a former goon complaining about the referees in order to turn the tide of the 2019 Stanley Cup Final. So Craig Berube, alongside two Bruins.
I can't not pick Q here.
Fair.
I just got to know. I got to know if he still drinks off the ski. I got to know if he keeps in touch with, like, it's his cousin that plays for the Canucks, right? It's like weirdly there's like a weird age difference.
He's like 40-year-old younger cousin.
I've got so many questions for Quinneville that I would have so much fun talking to him. Like, it would be great.
Next question then, from one, Jesse Puljujärvi isn't a bust. That's confirmed. Do the Oilers have the goaltending, depth, tenacity, and defense to make it out of the North? Do they have the goaltending, Deej? Yes, they have Mike Smith. Do you agree or not? Because Mike Smith has been pretty damn good this year.
Yeah, so I agree. I agree they have the goaltending in Mike Smith. I don't know why I feel so hesitant about that, though, because I shouldn't. Mike Smith has proved this year that he's a solid goaltender still.
Because it's Mike Smith.
He's proved for several years in a row now. Maybe if he had a cooler name. I don't know why. I don't know why I feel so hesitant about Mike Smith, because he is a very good goalie.
Blade Smith. Be like,
right, Laser Smith. Mike Laser. So I feel like they have the goaltending. The defense is, and I know, like, I brought up this point last week where you need a star defenseman to win a cup. Do the Oilers have a star defenseman? No.
Fair.
They've got a lot of very good defensemen, but they all are kind of specialized in their own special way, which I don't know why that's so funny to me, but it is.
So to answer those specific questions, basically, do they have all of those things? No. Does that mean that they won't make it out of the North? No. They still very well could. So
no.
Won't rule them out yet.
They very well could. Especially, and I think what makes it wide open for them and why they could make it out of the North is this very bizarre, complete stall that has happened with Winnipeg, where they've lost 7 in a row. I'm sure we'll get to that later, but there's something in the water up in Moosetown that I think is really opening this door. Like, Calgary has not been eliminated from the playoffs yet. That's how bad Winnipeg is. Like, Winnipeg hasn't clinched. That's insane. So I don't know. I know that's a little off topic for this, but for me, that is why I can see Edmonton going and playing a very beat up Toronto that maybe had a few rough games against Montreal, or a Montreal team that significantly overperformed versus Toronto.
I mean, I'll say this. At the very least, Canadian sports fans will be happy because you diverted away from their team, but you didn't do it to talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs. So I think they'll be okay. Oilers fans will be all right.
Hey, you're welcome, Canada.
Yeah. This is from one Mr. Z Bartel on Discord. Thoughts on the Jets' current slide? Well, there you go, Deej. And Paul Maurice's job. Utilization of the defense, specifically Pullman on the first pairing, Heinel in the press box. Deej, as you mentioned, I think it's 7 now, but the Jets had lost 6 straight games in regulation for the first time since the organization's move from Atlanta to Winnipeg in 2011. That's right, Jets fans. It's been 10 years already, as you know from the patch, but everybody else. It ties the franchise's longest losing streak since the Thrashers dropped 7 from January 19th to February 2nd of 2006. I mean, obviously, neither of us watched the Jets consistently enough to have a take on this in terms of how this plays out. You know, like, defensive utilization and stuff like that. I mean, I know there's been talk about, hey, why is Dylan DeMello on the third pairing and stuff like that. Ultimately, I think when it comes down to it, I don't know if Paul Maurice's job is in jeopardy because there's no way you're missing the playoffs. I joked about it before, but I'm being serious where I think, avoiding Edmonton in the first round.
I mean, it's getting to the point.
I don't think Calgary has enough to take advantage. It's really
getting to the point where it's a serious discussion now.
It is, but I don't think Calgary has enough, so I don't even want to partake in said discussion. But,
I agree. It would take a miracle.
I just don't see I don't see Paul Maurice being fired over this season when there was essentially as much turmoil as there was this year in regards to, okay, we'll line it for Dubois, and then there's been some injury troubles as well this season that have had definitely a negative effect on the team. So all things considered, I think you look at it and it's like, okay, they're still going to make it. How well they're going to do in the playoffs, I'm not sure. But, I mean, I still think they'll make it.
Yeah, they're going to carry this slump with them into the playoffs. Like, even if they turn it around for 2 or 3 games here. And it's like you said, like, I don't watch a lot of Winnipeg games close enough to have an informed opinion on this. But my friend that I went to the Florida Panthers game with last night brought up to me that Mark Scheifele has been so bad for the past 2 weeks. Kyle Connor has been so bad for the past 2 weeks. It destroyed his fantasy hockey playoffs this year, which I think is interesting. That the issue, at the very least, is that their top line has completely fallen apart.
I mean, yeah, Nick Ehlers is out due to injury, too, if I'm not mistaken. So that's obviously a very, very big factor for them at this stage. So, I don't know. It just seems like everything's going wrong for Winnipeg at the worst possible time. 2 more questions here, and then to be honest, I'm going to make the call. I'm going to say that we'll probably avoid our division breakdown here in this episode. We'll keep it a little bit shorter at this stage. We do have a lot to get to in said division breakdown. What was that? I didn't hear.
Yeah, it's been a slow week. It's been a slow 3. What's it been? 3 days?
There actually is quite a bit to talk about, in fairness, but it'll make for a better show on Friday. Big Friday show as well. You're not going to want to miss that. We got some fun news to share with you then and there. We'll get to, again, the penultimate question of this episode from Rob Ushi on Twitter. With Columbus's team makeup, is Bob Hartley their best coaching option next season? Understands Russians and European players so well and so much career success. So obviously we talked about Bob Hartley a lot in the last episode in the aftermath of Avangard Omsk winning the Gagarin Cup. Honestly, I think if there were an avenue for Bob Hartley to come back, it is probably with Columbus. I think that's a decent shout. The question is, how close to a coach is he in terms of style with John Tortorella? And is that just kind of what those players are willing to embrace at this stage? That's kind of the big question there.
Yeah, I think you're very right. So for me to answer this question about Bob Hartley, I would need information I don't have, which is, what is the quality of life for an American that just won the Gagarin Cup as a coach? Like, is he treated like a king? Like, you know what I mean? Is this guy on top of the world? Because I mean, Omsk, it's in a very odd location. Where it's in southern Russia, where it's not close to Europe. There's no like bodies of water. It's basically Russian Ohio. And so I think it would be a quality of life thing. I think since he's already won the cup, I don't know if he's like, yeah, let's run it back. I would imagine that you would need to speak to him in the almighty Dogecoin or dollar or whatever they're calling it nowadays. I think it would need to be a pretty big contract to get him to go from living like a king, presumably in southern Russia,
to competing with Drew Carey for the crown of King of Ohio. You had to find a way to mention Drew
Cleveland. Carey. That's where the Monsters play. I don't know. I really. Maybe I'll switch my answer. It's too bad it has to be current, because otherwise I'd switch my answer to Bob Hartley so I could know how a KHL Cup winning coach lives in southern Russia.
So I asked us that question again. I'm
really fascinated by this
when Bob Hartley becomes head coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets, and Deej would be very appreciative.
100%.
And to end this show, from Kyle Cotton on Twitter, who do you think the Rangers should pick up in the offseason to really send them over the playoff line? If we've learned anything in the past 24 hours, get a goon, apparently, and you'll be just fine. Maybe trade for Tom Wilson.
Yeah. Maybe trade for Tom Wilson. Tom Wilson, probably not available for trade. And so I guess in that case, I do want to bring up something else in hockey right now, because I believe it's going to happen, especially as I watch the score of the game currently. And I want to know your thoughts on it. Just give me a yes or no. Does Connor McDavid hit 100 points this season?
Yes.
Yeah, I think he does. He has 2 tonight, which I believe brings him to 93 with 5 games remaining at least.
I mean, I'm not a betting man, but I'm willing to place that bet. I don't know who they play coming up. Doesn't matter. Yeah, no, Connor McDavid's hitting that point total.
Yeah, as somebody who's been watching a lot of Oilers games lately, I implore you, if you have NHL TV, watch some Oilers games, because it is really cool to watch Connor McDavid play. In a world where all the athletes are so good, he is that much better than everybody else. It's like Gretzky in the 70s. And you were like, oh, he only scored because the goalies were like jumping like dolphins out of the water to try and stop a puck. But Connor McDavid's doing that with the butterfly style and the modern defense. And just watch Oilers games. It's really cool right now.
So shout out to the Oilers. Shout out to all of you for listening. Again, we'll get into a bit more conversation later on when Tom Wilson doesn't take up an hour's worth of an episode. Deej, any parting words here for this particular show?
Any parting words for this particular show? I don't know. I know Florida just took marijuana off its prohibited athletic substance rules, so we're probably getting a lot of UFC fights in Miami soon. It's like, finally, we're going to get the Diaz brothers. They're fighting each other at the Hard Rock. I don't know. I don't have any I don't have any words. That's just what popped up on my sports feed, and I'm fascinated to see how Dana White, who is probably smiling ear to ear right now.
God bless America. We'll see you later this week.
God bless a country where Dana White can get rich.
Fucking tomato.
Alrighty. I will see you all next week, if you're still here, after my controversial Tom Wilson opinions, my controversial George Peros opinions. I know Princeton grads won you over. I tried. All right, I'll see y'all later.
Goodbye, everybody.
Tougies Take is a Deej Audio production. Deej Audio, you're listening to it. Copyright 2021. See you next week.